Good morning. It's really great to have three such progressive businesses on the call this morning and to be able to record an interview with you. I'm going to ask each of you in turn about what your business is doing and why, and then we'll have a chat at the end about why perhaps other businesses are not doing as much as we'd like to see them do. But let's start with you, Sam. Sam Bruce from Much Better Adventures, taken, in my view, a real positive lead by looking at measuring the carbon impact of your different trips. Why did you get into this, Sam, and what have you been doing?
Thank you, Harold. Yeah, so I mean, Much Better Ventures was really set up with the mission to be a positive impact company. So we've always been looking for ways to kind of lead the way and use tourism as a force for good. No real surprise there. The clue's kind of in the name. But over the last few years, we've just been looking for kind of really practical ways that we can take on the climate crisis, and look for ways for the industry to collaborate around this, and just thinking a little bit beyond our own four walls. So in January 2020, we declared a climate emergency, which is an obvious first step. And then we called on the rest of the industry to do the same and join us. And then we set out a carbon action plan around that. So it's not just a declaration, it's also just putting down some practical actions that we'll be taking over the next 12 months. And our carbon action plan was fourfold. So it was to measure our carbon, reduce, remove, and campaign. So we can go into a bit more detail about later, but that first step, top of the list, was the measurement. So we embarked on producing a carbon label for all of our trips, which is now live on our site. So any customer who arrives and looks at any of our trips can now make an informed decision about how they'd like to travel based on the carbon score, if that's the way that they'd like to do it. I believe that will come if it's not already here. We wanted to get a carbon label out there because, frankly, you can't manage what you don't measure. And I think that was a really important first step as part of our carbon action plan. So we looked at, a bit technical, but scope 1, 2, and 3. So the whole suite of our carbon footprint. And the reason for doing that was really to then be able to identify and develop a carbon action plan with each of our suppliers. So we're kind of an agency, we work as a platform and work with multiple local hosts around the world. Our goal is to develop a really clear direction for all of those partners to also declare a climate emergency and also have a carbon action plan so that we can do that reduce set. So, I think measuring and producing a public carbon action plan and a carbon label is a must for everyone in our industry. And you can see that in other industries, like Oatly and Patagonia, really inspiring businesses who are leading the way in theirs. We thought, well, we could do this in ours as well. And yeah, personally, I think carbon labels should be on everything that we buy. I think it should be the new calorie. If we're really going to just, take on the challenge that we face as a society seriously, it needs to be front of mind all the time. So our carbon label, it is not the finished article, but it's a good first step. It includes all local transportation, it includes accommodation, it includes the activities, the guiding, staff, office operations, and food as well. What it doesn't include is flights to and from the destination, travel to the site of the destination yet, but that is coming. The reason for that is that we just simply don't have the data yet. We have people who join our trips from all over the planet, and it's just not something that we're able to measure just yet. But that's part of our roadmap. And then the next thing we did was we just made it completely open source. So we opened up our methodology to the whole industry and said, here's how we did it. Can anyone improve on it? And our hope is that people will make use of that and use it for their own carbon management and measuring as well. So it's certainly room for improvement, but yeah, it wasn't out there, and now it is. And yeah, we invite everyone in the industry to have a look at it and collaborate with us in improving it.
So it's obviously a big first step that Much Better Adventures has taken. I was intrigued to actually hear you mention what's happening outside of the travel and tourism sector, because it seems to me that one of the characteristics of our sector is it self-references all the time. It's very rare to hear a tour operator talk about what's happening in other industries. I was really impressed by that. But to come back perhaps slightly more critically, have you yet been copied? Has anybody yet taken up your measurement system and used it?
Yeah, well, we didn't want to get in the way of that, so it was we published it and made it available without people needing to get in touch with us to use it, which I think is a valid approach. But we certainly have, yes, we've had companies get in touch with us and say that they have used it, that they are using it, they're planning on using it. So there's pickup there, and in the Tourism Declares community, in which we shared it, there's been some really interesting collaboration around it there as well. So yes, I mean it's fairly new. I mean, we released it in the last sort of 12-18 months or so. So I think this is something that will grow.
So I'm prepared to accept that it's very new, but in the context of President Biden saying this is the critical decade, your system has been out there quite a long time now. We'll come back to that.
You're right, actually, in that context, yeah.
Suzanne, Intrepid brought this, if I might say so, Sam, a little before Much Better Adventures engaged, and I think, Sam, you probably recognise that you were partly inspired by what Intrepid's done.
Absolutely.
But Suzanne, do you want to just explain? One of the things that I think is pretty unique about Intrepid's approach is this emphasis on science-based targets. Seems to me to be fundamental if this sector is going to make real progress.
Yep, I agree, and thank you very much. Yeah, so indeed the tourism industry has that really front seat to this unfolding emergency, with the impacts being felt on the places and people that we visit, and that's really the reason why Intrepid Travel declared climate emergency in January 2020. And our climate emergency is underpinned by a 7-point commitment plan, and that includes really the continuation of measuring our emissions, but also going 100% renewable in all our offices. And what you already pointed out is the commitment to ambitious emission reduction targets through the Science-Based Target Initiative, and that's in short SBTI, by setting science-based target in line with a 1.5-degree future. And certainly last year had very few highlights, but that was definitely our big highlight, that in 2020, Intrepid became the first global tour operator with a verified science-based target. And the important part is, by having that target, it shows now companies like ours how much and how quickly business needs to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions to prevent the worst impact of climate change, and leading us and other companies on that clear path towards decarbonisation. And setting the science-based climate target will actually see us reducing our emissions across our operations globally, but also across our supply chain. And it really sees us setting up for the next phase of our ongoing carbon journey that started already back in 2010 when we became carbon neutral. But it also provides us now, and that's really important, for clear targets to hold us accountable. And so it's a 15 years target with the baseline year of 2018. And the first phase of our decarbonisation plan includes a couple of items that I just thought I highlight here. So one is that we are moving all our offices to 100% renewable energy by 2025. But the important part is, and I think that's really of interest here, is what are we doing on our trips? So first part is we are reviewing flights under 1.5 hours, and to replace those where it's actually feasible with alternatives that exist for ground transport, and that's done for the top 50 itineraries by 2022. And so, for example, we have done this already on a majority of our trips in China, where we replaced the internal flights with high-speed trains. But it also falls into like the development of new products now and providing product recommendations for low carbon trips. So that's, for example, for our premium trips that feature now a number of accommodations using actually renewable energy and experiences that involve community, environmental, wildlife conservation projects. But we also have really focused more since the pandemic on domestic products, so that customers really can explore their back garden backyard, and we have also increased our portfolio of walking and cycling trips, and that's really recognizing that those, of course, are our lowest carbon output trip styles, and they are also really in high demand as we're all coming out of months of lockdown and quarantine. So that's really kind of giving you an idea of what we are doing, but it's also just that the decarbonization is really now ingrained in the product development going forward.
Suzanne, could I just push you a bit on the relationship between the carbon strategy and the COVID strategy? Because it seems to me there are some connections here, aren't there? That people are more likely to want to travel domestically, which makes non-air travel a better opportunity. Are you seeing that linkage in the way your product range is developing?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm based, for example, in Australia. Our international borders are closed for the past 18 months. So really, that's where the kind of increase of domestic product came in, because that's what we here in Australia currently can only do.
But in terms of the seriousness of COVID and climate change in the travel and tourism industry, which do you see as the biggest threat to the industry?
I think in the long term, we all have COVID at the front of our minds, but we should definitely not lose the broader side of sustainability issues, and specifically climate change. And I think that's also where the domestic product is really important, because we make people travel and in many cases fly. Being in Europe, you have a lot of more options to get to the start of your journey by train, and we see definitely that change in mindset. But by also offering more domestic products, people can really make any travel that they take overseas really count, because that's the important part. Like, people will take, again, long haul flights, but it's about making them count. Don't just go for 3 days, stay longer, travel slower, but also really explore that domestic market in where you're based, for Europe or North America, for example.
Suzanne, can I just pursue you a little more on the question of the impact of fire in Australia on domestic tourism? Because you've had you always have some fires every year. It's been a not great year for fire this year. It's been a bit more of it, as I understand it. How long does it take a destination which has been hit by fire, which is often associated with climate change? How long does it take for that destination to recover?
It's a good question. So we certainly had the mega fires that started in 2019 and went into 2020. The ashes really circulated the globe, and that was just before the pandemic hit. So certainly those regions, I can't give you exact data. I would have to.
Well, Suzanne, let me put it to you a different way. Has it actually impacted the kind of trips you're offering?
We certainly, when we see weather extremes like fires or heat waves in Europe, like, yes, tours are getting like changed or rerouted, because in some cases, of course, you can't visit certain areas. And I think certainly many tour operators in Europe will have seen this year with the fires in Sicily, in Italy, in Greece, etc. So yeah, business gets impacted.
And if the reason you're going is for the forest and the natural environment, and it's been burnt out, the attraction is gone, hasn't it?
Exactly, and that's why we really have that front seat in the climate emergency, because we are all in the tourism sector about visiting those destinations, and especially that kind of appreciation of biodiversity, connecting with nature, and we're seeing those destinations across the world now impacted by climate change.
Thanks, Suzanne. Arnold, you've been sat there very patiently listening to tour operators talking about how they're approaching the problem. I wanted to ask you, I guess, a slightly different question, because you sell essentially bus tours to both tour operators and to the public. What motivated you to change the way you run your business?
Well, I think, like everyone else, I think we have to act, whoever we are, whatever business we are in, it's a sort of a moral obligation, but also I should say soon a business obligation to act on those green agenda. And it's hard. It's hard because if you are amongst the first to do the move, then you have to pay the price for it because you're the first investor. For instance, we had to, of course, and as a sightseeing business, we are known in the industry not to be the greatest innovator. You know, we used to run buses and that's it. But we thought that Intrepid groups thought that, okay, we need to be leading the way towards a more sustainable tourism. And I think in that respect, COVID changed also a lot of things because there is a before and after COVID, where if you interlink the climate situation and the COVID situation together, then you need to think, what do we need? What do we do so that we can still continue travel in the future years? But this journey on a green, bus tour started for us in the years 2015, 2016, when we looked at, how can we source someone who could help us, having buses which are better for the city we are traveling in. And it was a hard journey because no one was doing that at the time, especially in Europe. Because it's another thing is where do you source your components? The bus, the motor, and because there's also a thinking behind that you need to respect certain standards and certain norms in order to provide you with the bespoke and good equipment. So we partnered with the European companies like Envy, BMZ for the batteries. And we started the whole discovery of how do we engineer those buses and how do we build them together, because in the end, what we provide is a different experience with these buses as well. And I think this is where we joined the dots between the climate ambition and the customer experience. Because it's actually much nicer to travel on board an electric buses. You don't have the same feeling, you don't have the same noise, you don't have the vibrations, and then you are much more into the city that you are traveling in a much smoother way. You are, you can give a different, almost sensual experience. You discover the city with your 5 senses. You don't have the noise, you don't have the smell. So that's also something that the customer value when they are on board the buses. But to really come back to your question, what really triggered us, we wanted to be ahead of the game and also ahead of the legislation, because we know it's going to come. We know it's going to be compulsory at some point. We want to deliver this before it becomes the norm and that everybody rushes to respect the norm. We think it's for us also a competitive advantage to do that before the rest of the crowd.
Arnaud, earlier in what you said, you talked about the extra costs of being a first mover, and you just talked about first mover advantage. I mean, when you look at those two things, where do you think the balance currently lies for Tootbus? Has it been a big advantage to be a first mover? Or will it be easier for those who come on afterwards following and replicating what you've done?
Well, financially speaking, definitely being a first mover is not a great position to be in, because you have to bear the cost of setting up the production lines, and the supplier asks you to participate to this sort of first industrial adventure. So you have to really believe, and that's what the Intrepid and Tootbus brand is about, is how do we move the posts first so that we can help others follow. But we can't say that financially this is a very rational move to do. We think that in the end we'll be recognized as the brand that has some credential for this move towards a greener way of experiencing the cities. But it's hard because in average an electric bus is something like 3 times more expensive than a normal diesel one. And I think this is also coming back to the legislation. It's something that we should also address as a community. Shouldn't we make sure that we pay the real price of carbon when we have when we buy a diesel bus? Because the bus is one thing, but also you have to build the infrastructure. you have to have your power sockets organized in your depot. And then when you put that in your depot, then you lose space to park your buses. So you have also to increase the space of your depot for the same number of buses. So that all that sorts of elements have to be taken into consideration when you are moving towards that sort of strategy. So it's not something which is done overnight, and it's not something which is done just for a year and then we move back to a different strategy. It's a journey you embark on, and you can't go back.
Just before we move on to Suzanne, it does seem to me that we shouldn't omit to mention the health advantages of not having diesel buses running around the cities, and particularly not idling at bus stops in the way that they do, certainly in London and in other cities. An electric bus is not going to be pumping out poisonous gases into the environment for local people to breathe in, and that is a health reason as well for switching to electric. But Suzanne, we've got about 10 minutes left. I'm really keen to hear now from each of you about what you think would drive the pace of change, because we've got 3 leaders here in the sector, no doubt about it, you're leaders, but you're not exactly being followed rapidly by lots of others. What do you think, Suzanne, would make the difference?
Yeah, no, thank you. I think it's just maybe I start off sort of the broader picture, but then also sharing sort of why we are doing it and why it makes sense for others to follow. So first of all, I understand that all things COVID-19 are at the top of all our minds now, but I always advocate that we shouldn't lose sight of the broader sustainability issues, because as we're here today, it is particular climate change. And while the pandemic poses that huge threat to the viability of our industry, climate change poses an even bigger long-term threat. What I really want to see is the depth of the structural change in the economy really is required to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. And that really means everyone needs to be involved. That's countries, cities, but it's also the private sector and individuals to really strengthen the action without any delay, and really kind of little room to outsource climate action. It's about the action that we can take right away. And especially when listening to Sam and what they have outsourced, we are outsourcing not open sourcing the science-based target methodology. Really, it's about taking advantage of that and using it, because in our case, and just out of sharing this, by setting the greenhouse gas emission reduction target based on science, it really helps to drive innovation. It secures that long-term competitive advantage and really drives real operational emission reductions. But it also really, which I think is really important, is that it sends that clear signal to all our stakeholders to where the company is really heading, and provides that context also for investment that is needed to transform the business model.
And Suzanne, that when you say it drives it to all stakeholders, that's both your customers and your suppliers, your business partners as well as the customers. I think that's an important part of the business case. Sam, could I come?
Also staff. So it's this kind of all different types of stakeholders.
Sam, could I come to you next? You and I might disagree about how rapidly people are going to follow your model within the Tourism Declares community. But how optimistic are you that what you've created can be easily replicated? Intrepid is a massive company with big resources. You're not in any way in the same scale. You have the same kind of ambitions. Do you think a lot of the other businesses are going to follow your model? Have you got examples of that?
Yeah, so I mean, the thing about collaboration within something like Tourism Declares, or with the Glasgow Declaration, is that it attracts businesses big and small. Both can learn from each other, and that's the really exciting thing. I think our industry at the moment is one of the most exciting places to be working right now. And if you've got an interest in sustainability, what a great industry to be part of. We've got all the businesses that have signed up to that, have real commitment to innovating and working with other businesses and opening their doors and making cool things and making it open source. This is great stuff. There's huge potential for us to make leaps and bounds here, rather than working in silos as I feel we have been. So I think there's been a shift in narrative a little bit, albeit it all just feels a bit too slow. And Harold, you've obviously been banging the drum for a long time, so it feels like it's the age of rhetoric is still here. But I do feel quite hopeful. I think the thing that is interesting that we're seeing is that business case is that we are seeing a real link between our sustainability efforts and bookings and refunds. From what we can tell, we've got industry leading levels of refunds, really high loyalty levels. We're seeing customers cite our sustainability initiatives in conversations with each other and in reviews that we're seeing. And so there's definitely a link between business trust and brand and loyalty. So I think there's definitely a business case there. Customers are more attuned to this kind of thing and looking for it and expecting it. And it pleases me no end when I see a customer asking us difficult questions about the sustainability of our trips, and that's happening more and more and more. So yeah, that definitely gives me hope that customers want it and businesses are looking to make practical action and are committing to that through things like Tourism Declares and the Glasgow Declaration. So I think what would be really interesting is for businesses to work on, being able to quantify it a little bit more. How does this actually affect bookings? Because if you can make that link very clearly, I'm sure more businesses will jump on board with that.
Sam, I agree with all of that, but I suspect that we know that personal recommendation is critical to travel and tourism marketing, and I suspect that those personal recommendations are less likely to be made if people feel they might be embarrassed by the company they're recommending not having a good sustainability track record. I think that's where the real prize is. But Arnold, we're beginning to come to the end of this, and I do want to give you an opportunity to comment on this. One of the differences between you and the other two is that you essentially sell into either directly to the consumer or to the tour operator. People ought to be choosing, didn't they, the greenest option when they're putting their products together, and the greenest option is going to be a toot bus, unless you actually have some serious competitors, which seems to be a little way off yet.
Yeah, well, we strongly believe that like in any business, the truth or what is going to come as a solution is going to come from the customers, because the green agenda is going so much higher now in the sort of interest, for customers, top of mind. It becomes an issue. People can see the consequences of climate change. So it's becoming more and more difficult to ignore those things and unacceptable to go for operators that are not doing anything in order to at least limit the impact of the tourism and the transport on their cities. And also it's a question of respect for the inhabitants. We are in urban tourism, and we have also, I think, a duty to make sure that we can still visit those cities in 100 years to come. So we need to make things easier for customers to get on board green buses. And also, I think it's the whole customer experience that you have to put in accordance to this green agenda. It comes with the green bus, but it also comes with the fact that you trying to be a bit more digital in a good way in order not to give out too many brochures, so that you really try to tread lightly, which is surprisingly was the motto or the name of our first campaign in order to promote green transportation mode when I was working for the Eurostar, and I think it was in 2008, 2010. So, some people had this conscious of how do we switch modes and how do we push the green agenda at a very early stage.
I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time, Arnold. I do just want to mention that I think we need to look to government as well to change the regulatory framework, probably more relevant to toot bus than to the tour operators, but it's a critical part of the process.
Part of our business is also to have a discussion with the government and the mayor to help us deliver that green agenda.
Well, good luck with that. What I wanted to say was a big thank you to all of you for participating this morning, and to say that we will be featuring many of these businesses on the platform for change that we're developing with WTM to try and speed up the process. And certainly Sam and Suzanne and Arnold we'll be back to you asking for your examples to put up there as a way of trying to promote these excellent examples. Could I just finish by saying thank you and good luck with encouraging others to follow on what you're doing. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.